Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the fuselage of our new FT Tubby B-17. Now the really cool thing about this is although it looks complicated, every step pretty much takes only about 3 minutes. And the best part is everything self-aligns and self-jigs. We're going to take you through every step that you need to know, not only for this size, but also for our in the future to be released, made to order version of our 100-inch long monster B-17. And also we're excited to announce that we are going to be bringing back plans. If you'd like to have the free downloadable plans immediately, all you need to do is be an FTCA, which is a Flight Test Community Association member. That's going to give you immediate access to the downloadable plans at no charge. Plans will be made available roughly 1 month after the release of this airplane. If you're a hardcore scratch builder and you want to build right now, go ahead and join the FTCA, help us protect and grow the hobby, and also get the plans for free. Now, if you're ready to build along with me, let's get our materials in order and we'll get started. So the first step in our fuselage is going to be locating the parts that you see here. We're first going to start with the center section of our fuselage. We're going to weed it out and then we're going to assemble it. From that point, everything is going to fasten to that piece. So it's really important that we take our time, line up all of our marks, and build this as straight as possible. For that reason, I'm going to be using my triangle square from my crafty kit to make sure everything is perpendicular. Let's go ahead and start out by weeding out our pieces, and then we can identify them and then move forward. The easiest way to weed out our cavities is to simply score cut close to the paper on the bottom and then fold it over 180 degrees and then peel it out with your thumb. Take your time on these pieces to make sure that these cavities are as clean as possible. This will give us a really nice, tight, clean 90-degree joint. Now that we have the main center section weeded out, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the outer skin. For this outer skin, we're going to go ahead and remove the paper from some key areas, but we want to be very careful that we don't remove them from the wrong areas. Removing the paper is going to give us the ability to bend the outer skin around the center section. The areas that we're going to want to remove are going to be the sections of paper that you see right outside the very center here that has a lot of indicator markings. Once we remove that piece, you're going to see little sections here and here that we're also going to want to remove. Now, because our etching is always different here, it doesn't hurt to take your razor blade and just to slightly cut through the facing paper, but don't go too deep or else it'll cause it to crease. I go about 1/2 millimeter down just to make sure that we're right through the paper. That's perfect. Cool. Once we've scored everything, all we simply need to do is very slowly peel the paper up. And I like to pull the paper basically straight vertical, and I kind of roll it off of the foam itself. Our new maker foam has a lot more adhesion than the older maker foam, so if you pull it too fast, it's going to go ahead and tear and leave some of the paper still on the foam. Going nice and slow and pulling vertically is a really great way to be able to get the paper to release nice and clean. Again, we're going to skip this section right here. We're going to go to the next section in. You see I'm kind of pulling this up. Just pulling straight vertical. One more time, we're going to skip the center section and we're going to put our attention right over here. There we go. The last pieces that we're going to prepare and glue for this matter are going to be our 2 main formers. All we simply need to do is crack this over 180 degrees and you're going to see that it folds over exactly on top of itself. Once we confirm that it folds over 180 degrees and everything's clean, we can go around with a perimeter of glue and glue it down. I'm gonna avoid the center section where you see this long dash here. The reason is because that's gonna be where the canopy latch passes through. I don't wanna have to add any unnecessary glue that I have to cut through later. I'm gonna hold that down until it's dry, and the same process on the other side. Whenever we have a fold over, I like to focus my energy on the smaller piece, because the smaller piece is gonna be the area that ultimately covers up. If we put it on a bigger piece and maybe there's an open cavity, we can run into a situation where basically we put glue where we don't need it. Take it down to the table, make sure all the perimeter is flat, and we're good to go. Feel free to pause the video at this time. Make sure that your pieces look exactly like this. Once we're ready, we're gonna go ahead and put our attention and make the main center section of the center of our B-17. Let's go ahead and put our pieces to the side here, and we're gonna make sure we have plenty of room. And with this build, I always wanna make sure my table is nice and clean. The first two areas that we're gonna fold up are gonna be the outer edges. These outer edges are A-folds, which means the side plates are gonna be above the bottom plate or the top plate. This is our top plate, these are our side plates. So the way that we do an A-fold properly is we're gonna rotate this up 90 degrees, and we're gonna hold it there. This is where that square comes in handy because it really helps us get everything nice and true. We want to make sure we can easily pull this up. We're always going to practice our motion. And once we're happy with that, I can place a bead of glue right on the bottom here. I'll put it right on this paper and on the other side. Now with the side plate firmly against the table, I can rotate this up 90 degrees. And I'm going to use my triangle square just to make sure that we stay perpendicular. Always mention using the table as your friend. This gives us a nice tight joint. You never want to fold an A fold or a B fold up in the air. You want to be pushing against something firm and flat. We're going to do the same process now on the other side. Again, we're going to make sure that we can easily rotate this up 90 degrees. Check it with the triangle square. If you have any residual foam in your cavity, it's going to cause it to kind of lift up and be crooked. So make sure that these areas are nice and clean. All right, we're going to place a bead of glue right on the bottom of the side plate on both sides. Again, we're going to rotate up 90 degrees. I'm pushing down with my thumb right against the table, and I'm going to hold it there. Always give your glue about 45 seconds to fully cool and make sure it's nice and firm before moving on to the next step. Our next step is going to be an A-fold on the side plates. Again, we're going to leave the side plate firmly against the table. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees. And what you should see is both these tabs locking in and pushing up against the former. This is going to help us hold it at 90 degrees and also form up the fuselage. Once we're happy with the bend, we're going to focus our glue again on the bottom of the side plate. There we go. And then I'm going to favor my glue right on the sides here. Now we're going to fold this over. We're going to push this down, and we're going to hold it firmly against the table. Because this area is thinner here, I kind of like to work around just to make sure everything is flat up against the table at a hard 90-degree angle. Now you're going to notice that these top pieces angle in a little bit. After about 15 seconds or so of holding this down, just rock it forward for about 10-15 seconds, and then rock it back. After 10 or 15 seconds again, we can rock it forward, and then we can rock it back. And one more time, rock it forward, and we're done. Every time that we return this to the table, we should see that it's nice and flat. Always make sure that the section is 90 degrees and flat up against the table, so everything we apply to it afterwards is going to be straight as well. Our last section here, we're going to give it a test fit. Again, we're going to go up to 90. Press it into place. Make sure we can rotate it forward, no problem. That looks great. Now again, we're going to focus our glue right on the bottom of the side plate, starting to stop in about a 1/4 inch from the edge. And then right up along on both sides of our center section. Fold it down up against the table. Hold it there 15 seconds or so. We're going to rock it forward. And then rock it back. All these motions here, I'm not pushing down and wrinkling the foam. I'm using very soft hands so I don't dent the foam. And you don't need a lot of pressure to be able to get it to go where you want. And one last time. There we go. As you can see, no matter what angle I lay this on the table, it's nice and flat. We're ready to move on to our next step now, and that's to install our formers. Now for our formers, we're going to have 3 main formers here. The first 2 look just like here. We probably already folded these over and glue it. The next one we want you to locate looks just like this, and this is going to be our center former for the top of the fuselage. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and put a bead of glue right around the perimeter and fold it over. This is going to be a common step in pretty much all of the B-17. We really wanted to make it simple to build, so we're using a lot of these 180-degree foldovers that simply crack, fold over, and glue. Make sure that your 3 formers look just like what you see here, and we're ready to move on to our next step. Now we've tabbed these formers to basically make them line up and tab right into our center section. So you should be able to easily identify the rear former, which has the 3 slots on the bottom, the big slot on the top, small slot on the bottom. And when we push this in, you'll see it lines up exactly with the rear former of our center section. Once you've placed this and made sure that all the different surfaces mount up nicely, we can go ahead and place some glue right on the bottom of the top former, around the perimeter, and then we'll glue it in place. Just lift it up slightly, line it up, and push it together. Once the glue is fully cooled, we're going to flip it over and we're going to do the other side. This former here should line up beautifully with the very top surface here and the bottom. Once you're happy with the alignment, same process as the other former on the very bottom of the former, and then we're going to slightly glue the perimeter all the way around. And I always like to use a table as my friend here. Press this down, check for alignment, and then hold it in place. Our last former is going to tab right on the other side of our battery and bomb bay box, and it's going to be right here. After we've test fitted it, a bead of glue right down the middle on both sides is all we need. Then we can press it into place. Anytime you have the opportunity to check for perpendicular, it's always a good idea to do so. We're going to let this fully cool, and now we can start prepping the top skin for the center section of our fuselage. Now this upper skin is really easy to form here, and all we need to do is either use the edge of the table, or what I like to do specifically with this design is simply use the flat of the table as my friend and slowly rotate up using the edges of my fingers. Now I'm not pushing down hard, I'm basically just slowly rotating this from the edge of the paper and lifting and curling. Now, if you're scratch building this at home, just keep in mind that the foam does have a grain to it. So if you lay out your patterns in the wrong direction, this piece here is going to feel so rigid and it's going to kind of crinkle for you. So always bend a scrap piece of foam to identify which way your foam is going before you cut it out. There we go. And you can see when we take it nice and slow, this has a beautiful gradual bend that works great. Let's do the other side now. And I'm not folding it over hard. I'm just kind of lifting and curling, using my fingers and rolling it. Another technique that my good friend John, who's basically created the whole Master Series, does is he kind of pulls it over the edge of the table, just like you see here. You can use that trick, but because these pieces are smaller in size, it's pretty easy just to use the table in your hands. And our last little sections here don't need a lot of work. We're just going to kind of suggest that they should curl in, and when we glue it onto the fuel formers, it'll take the rest of its form. Now for these next steps, make sure that you have a glue stick handy because you don't want to run out of glue at the wrong time. You're going to notice some different hash marks and center lines. You're going to see some wider ones, you're going to see a center line for a former, and some offset spacing. This is really important that we watch this and we line this up very carefully and take our time, because this is basically going to center up the outer skin, and if you do this right, everything is going to fall into place amazingly well. First thing we want to do is we want to line this up, and you're going to see that we have center marks on our formers. This open former is actually going to have an open center mark for you to reference off of. We're going to line up those center marks right over top of the center line of our upper skin. Once we practice our alignment, we're not going to glue everything all at once. We're only going to glue that center section. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to place our glue right down the middle of our center former, and then we're going to favor the glue on the insides of the formers because the outer formers are going to be used by the front nose and also the rear of the fuselage. So first I'm going to go ahead and place my glue. Again, I'm only going to concentrate on this former here. There's one. This one, again, we're going right on the center section, basically where the foam is folded over 180 degrees and not curved. Now we can flip this over. No need to rush this. We have plenty of time to work with it. Lay this right over our hash marks, just like we did before. We're lined up on the edge marks, so we know that our offset and our formers are perfect. We're lined up on the center line. And again, we're going to hold this down for a full 45 seconds to make sure it has good adhesion. And what we're going to do now that the glue is hardened is we're going to rotate this 90 degrees all the way down, pushing up against the formers. And what you'll see is that this wraps around beautifully right around the formers. We should see right where the airfoil is and the airfoil cutout is that there's just about a 1/16 of an inch perimeter all the way around. That's exactly what we want, so the wing can basically crush up into the fuselage and get a really nice fit. Once we're happy with the way everything looks, we can open this up. And I'm just going to face this away from me and towards you. I'm going to face the majority of my glue on the one side here, right down the middle of the center, and then on the inside of the rear former. And then I'm going to trace the full perimeter of the side plate. Oh, this is why we always have that extra glue stick. There we go. Now we're going to repeat that process again. We're rolling it down. We're not pushing too hard, just nice and smooth. And then once I get to the table, I'm basically holding this down firmly against the table for about 15 seconds or so. You can take this time, kind of inspect everything, pushing on the back, pushing on the front. And now I can rotate this a little bit forward for about 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and back. And again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and back. The important thing is that we put pressure over this whole entire side plate to get good adhesion between the outer skin and the center box. Cool. You can see this makes a beautiful smooth shape, and we're ready to do the other side. We're rotating this down 180 degrees. You can see that we have that small 1/16 of an inch right there on the very edge. And once we're happy with that, we can open it up. I'm going to face the majority of my glue on the one side here, right down the middle of the center, and then on the inside of the rear former. And then I'm going to trace the full perimeter of the side plate. And then we're going to rotate forward. Again, you can rotate this towards you. It'll be a lot easier. We're going to take it right down. We're going to hold the center section right there. Press down on both sides. Then we can rotate forward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Rotate back. Rotate forward, rotate back. And as you can see, every which way I rotate this on the table, it's perfectly flat. The center section of our fuselage is now done. We're ready to put the energy towards the rear of our fuselage. Let's go ahead and get those pieces right now. Now that we have the center section of our fuselage done, we're going to put our attention towards the rear portion of the fuselage. Now this piece is a lot of fun to build, and the two pieces you're going to need are going to be right here. Just like many of our flight test builds, we're going to weed out the areas that we don't need for our A folds or our B folds. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Again, we always just take our blade at least 3/4 of the way through. Oftentimes the laser depth is going to be adjusted perfectly by our laser master, Jason McQuiston, but it never hurts to trace this area out with your knife just to get a good clean release. I always like to dowel the tip of my razor blade on the piece of concrete or really coarse sandpaper, so that way it doesn't cut through the facing paper. And just like before, we're going to fold this over 180 degrees. And you can see here, I just have a little bit of residue here. I didn't do the best job cleaning this out. All I simply need to do is just take the side of my razor blade and scrape it clean. Now that we have the cavities cleared out, let's go ahead and peel out the paper of the areas that we need. You're going to see the center section here has the area where our stabilizer is. The outer two sections just on both sides are going to be the areas of foam that we want to remove. We can always go down through this and just make sure we're going right through the facing paper just slightly with our razor blade. Once we've done that, we're going to lift up on those areas really carefully, pulling vertically. And the paper should remove beautifully. Don't worry too much if some of the paper stays on. You can actually take a piece of tape and tape it over and then pull that up, or just dig in with your nail a little bit, peel it up, and start again. A little bit of fuzz is not going to hurt you. If you're scratch building this off of our downloadable plans, these are going to be marked as blue lines, or basically etch lines. It'll be really important if you're cutting this out to use your razor blade to go just through the facing paper, but not too deep. Feel free to pause the video right now. Make sure that your pieces look just like what you see here. Now it's hard to describe whether it's going to be an A-fold or B-fold because technically it's vertical, but it's also the top piece. So we didn't mark that for confusion, but what we're going to want to do when we do our practice fold is leave this portion here firmly against the table, rotate this up 90 degrees exactly. We want this to not fight us or not bend over, or else the cavity that you have here or the fold that you have here is going to be dulled. We want it as sharp as possible. You also want to test fit and fold up the bottom plate to 90 degrees. This is one step I would strongly recommend making sure you have your triangle square handy just to make sure you get it perpendicular. We're going to go ahead and we're going to place a bead of glue on the bottom of our top or side plate, depending on how you look at it. We're going to leave that firmly against the table. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees while pressing against the table itself. Get this nice and sharp crease. Once we're happy with that, we're going to go ahead and continue to hold this until the glue is fully dried, and then we're going to do the other side the exact same way. Again, we're folding up to 90 degrees. We're happy with that. We're going to place the glue on the bottom of the plate here, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. We're going to leave this portion against the table. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees and hold it there as we push it down against the table. This is going to do a couple things for us. This is going to give us a beautiful edge to be able to glue our two halves together, but it's also going to make it really easy to form the rear portion of our fuselage consistently and smoothly. Now that both these pieces are dried, let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the other side. Always start with a test fold. Make sure that we don't have any resistance. Then we're going to focus our glue right on the bottom of the plate here. Always starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Bring it up 90. Making sure it's nice and perpendicular to the table. And then we'll do the other side. Back to 90, firmly against the table. If you've done these steps properly, your pieces should look just like what you see here. Now that we have these edges glued, we have a really strong area that we can actually use to be able to fold this together. So what we're going to do here is we're going to slowly start rotating this up. And our goal is to take this plate here and bend it parallel with the bottom plate. And I'm not going to do this just in one bend. I'm just slowly rocking this back and forth, getting the radius nice and smooth. And you can see with that strength from this bend right here, it's really easy to form this. Almost there. Doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to be able to bend this over just like we did with our fuselage and have a nice smooth transition. Same process now on the other side. We really wanted to put a lot of energy into making sure that every step on this B-17 is incredibly simple and repeatable. We put more time in designing the build experience than we actually did the airplane. There we go. And you can see now when I rotate this up to be flat, the radiuses are nice and smooth. Same process on the other side. Once you've mastered these techniques, basically, you've done everything you need to do to build this whole entire airplane. If there's ever a tip to give, it's basically don't try to do it in just one shape. Just the rocking motion back and forth really helps the foam relax and give you a nice smooth curve. There we go. Now you're gonna notice that these two pieces have different looks to them here. We have a thicker spline for the top surface and also a thinner spline for the bottom surface. We made the top spline a little bit thicker so it's a lot easier for you to pinch together. So the first spline we're gonna put together is gonna be the bottom one. The biggest thing with this bottom surface is we wanna make sure that the back edge and the front edge line up perfectly, and that we're also using the table as our friend to push down firmly to make sure it's nice and flat. You're also gonna notice two hash marks on one side. This is gonna be where our tail wheel is gonna push into the folds and be able to be glued in. We don't wanna put any glue there just now because we're gonna be putting some wire in between that area. So for that reason, I'm gonna use this section right here with these two marks as the section that we need to put our glue down. We've already practiced our fold. We have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. Let's go ahead and do that right now. I'll place a nice smooth bead of glue all the way to the edge. Notice I'm staying a little bit above that bottom edge so I don't accidentally glue it to the table. Now I can take it down to the table. I'm gonna line up my edges. We have plenty of time to work with, so we don't have to panic. And once I get everything lined up, I'm almost gonna act like I'm zipping it together. I'm just gonna squeeze it together, making sure I constantly check the front and the back, and that's firmly against the table. You don't want to rush this step because if this piece isn't fully dried and we start pushing it together, it's going to come apart. It's a lot harder to re-glue a piece than to glue it right for the first time. Once I have everything pressed together, I'm going to hold this for at least 45 seconds to a minute and let it fully dry. Once this is dry, you're going to see what a beautiful joint on the very bottom it makes. You're also going to see the two little dots that indicate where our tail wheel is going to go, and this is going to be really helpful in the future. Now we can start practicing our fold, and all we simply need to do is bring this around together, and we're going to pinch the two edges and kind of pull down very delicately, just like that. Now just like we did on the bottom section, we're going to use the table as our friend, but before we flip it over, we want to make sure that we can easily do this motion and get it lined up as close as possible. You're also going to notice some hash marks on both sides of this, and this is going to be where our rudder is going to push through with a couple barbecue skewers. For that reason, we don't want to put any glue in these areas. Just going to make sure I have plenty of hot glue available, and now we're going to repeat this process once again. You're going to note that I'm keeping it about 1/4 inch away from the edges. This one's a little bit more space to glue, and it's a lot easier to hold down. Again, I'm going to fold this together. We got plenty of time to work with it. The biggest thing I want to do is just match this up on both sides. And once I'm happy, I can flip it over. Right on the ground. Almost there. There we go. And now I'm going to pinch it together and push firmly against the table, and I'm going to hold it. You can see I can get my whole arm in here, and I can do that same little zipper maneuver while pushing down, while checking to make sure everything's flat. You can also put very gentle pressure downwards right on the top here, and that's going to let it take form. We're going to give this a good 45 seconds to 1.5 minutes to fully dry, and then we can fit it together with our center section of our fuselage. You can see this whole tail section's done. We got nice round radius edges on the front and the back. Don't worry if some of your curves are uneven because we can easily mold that in later just to make sure everything matches up. But the biggest thing we want are nice flat edges on our two seams. Now this top seam is going to be covered up by the area where our tail gunner is. So if it's not perfect or it's more open than you like it to be, don't worry because it's all going to be covered up. Now it's time for some test fitting here. We're going to have a lower spline that's smaller and an upper spline that's bigger. I'm going to start with the upper spline here. I'm going to line it up very carefully and I'm going to press it into place. And now I can reach through the former and I can kind of pull it out. And when I'm pressing down, I can let this piece pop right around our center section. You're going to want to practice to make sure that everything fits the way you want it. Now you may have some glue globs around the former that you may want to get rid of if you're getting kind of any resistance. At the end of the day, we want to see this fuselage flat up against the outer skin. That looks really good. And this is where we kind of take a deep breath because we're going to do a couple steps at one time. First, I'm going to pop this off and I'm going to place the majority of my glue for this upper skin right around the skin that you see here. Now for this lower portion here, I'm not gonna put it on my lower former, but I'm actually gonna put it on the lower portion that you see right here. So when I press this in, it's not gonna squeeze and drip out. Everything's looking good here. We do have a good 45 seconds for all this to set up, so we don't have to rush or panic too much. I'm gonna focus the majority of my glue right on this inside edge. There we go. I'm gonna place some glue right on this inner lip right here. There we go. Same process as before. I'm gonna tab in with the upper piece. And I got a little bit of glue squeeze, and that's okay. Now I'm gonna take my time, and because the center section is nice and square, all I need to concentrate on doing is making sure that my lines match up here and that this outer skin is firmly against the center section on both sides. This glue is already cooled down quite a bit, so I'm using my fingers, but you can also use a scrap piece of foam if you want. Again, I'm just kind of looking around. We got a good 45 seconds to make any adjustments that we need. There we go. I'm going to hold this for at least 45 seconds to a minute and let it fully dry. All right, now that we have the rear section of our fuselage done, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the front section. You're gonna see two pieces for the nose that look just like this. I'll go ahead and flip them over so you can see what the inside pieces look like. Just like before, we're gonna be removing some paper to be able to give us our curves. Here's our center section. We're not gonna touch that. We're gonna remove the paper on every other section after that. So these two sections and these two sections. I'm gonna go ahead and do it first. You can watch me and then pause the video to make sure your pieces look just like mine. Always take your time to make sure you double and triple check that you're ripping off the paper from the right sections. Now, if God forbid you do rip it off the wrong section, don't worry. It just means you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful when forming those pieces to keep those pieces nice and straight. And again, here's our center section. We're gonna leave that alone. We're gonna go to the next section. Just leave that one alone. Go to the next section. Center section. Next section gets removed. Leave this one alone. Remove this one. Feel free to pause the video, make sure that your pieces look just like mine, and then we can start forming them. The first piece that we're going to put our attention towards is going to be the bigger piece. Now with this piece, we can use the edge of the table if we wanted to, and we can kind of curl it around just like you see here. That is absolutely fine. Or you can use your thumb and your fingers and you can curl it this way as well. If any of you guys have built some of John Overstreet's amazing Master Series, a lot of these steps probably feel very comfortable and very familiar to you. That looks wonderful. Now to make life a little bit easier, because this does taper down, I'm going to remove some of this paper on this very edge here to allow it to hold that radius. What we have here is we have no resistance, and then we have resistance where the facing paper is. So I'm just going to go ahead and slightly nib off about a 1/16 inch of that paper to give me the taper I want. If you can make these pieces naturally lay where they're supposed to go instead of having to force it, the end product's gonna be a lot nicer. Now, along with kind of tapering and crushing this down, I'm gonna take the back edge of my blade and I'm gonna slightly just crush in the paper on this outer former here. And that's just gonna give me the ability to allow that taper to go in without that paper interfering with me. You're gonna see a hash mark right up against this edge that you see here. I'm just gonna do this facing towards me. It's frankly the easiest way to do that. I'm gonna line this up. I'm gonna hold it in place. And what I like to do is you can use, of course, tape and you can tape this down. But I like to glue from the one edge of where the paper meets all the way to the one side and then hold that in place, and then I can do the other side. So once I've laid this down and I'm happy with the way everything fits, I'm gonna place my glue basically from this edge of the paper to this edge of the paper. But the only difference is I'm gonna put it on the former itself. So again, I'm gonna start from the edge of the paper. I'm gonna skip over that little slot where our little skewer is gonna go, or our popsicle stick. Go all the way down to the edge. Now I can lay my piece in, lightly shingling it over, and I'm gonna just use a little bit of downward pressure. And that downward pressure is gonna hold that piece firmly against the former and also the outer skin. I'm gonna hold this for about a minute and let it fully dry. One side is dry. You can see when I remove it, nothing moves. That's perfect. Now I can kind of open this section up and I can favor the majority of the glue right on this former here as we peel through all the way to where the paper ends. And now again, I can let this shingle right over, press it down, and hold it in place. There we go. After about 45 seconds, you can see everything's holding into place. And now finally, I can do my last two pieces. I'm gonna open this one up. I'm gonna base the majority of my glue on this rear former. This is actually gonna cross over just a little bit on this back former. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of glue there. I'm gonna fold and wrap this all the way around and hold it there. All right, one piece to go here. Again, I'm gonna focus most of my glue right on the bottom of the former. Go right across the top. Oh, I actually popped this one open, but that's not a big deal because we're gonna glue it together. Now we're gonna fold this together, let it shingle over itself, and I'm gonna hold this until it's fully dry. You guys may have built before with me, but oftentimes I sing "You're My Sunshine" 2 times in a row before I release this. This keeps me honest from letting go of it too soon and gives the glue enough time to dry. All right, the first section of our nose is now done. We're gonna basically repeat the exact same process now on the smaller section. Let's go ahead and first start by curling the edges that we need to, and then we'll test fit it. And because this area tapers, again, I'm just gonna go ahead and remove about a 1/16 inch of the foam right on the edge. Definitely around where the paper is, just to make sure everything lays nice and clean. I'm just gonna take this to the edge of the table. Hold those center lines right over top of each other. And again, I can kind of fold this down right in line, letting the paper delicately shingle over itself. Again, you're welcome to use tape if you want. It's completely up to you. That looks great. Now I demonstrated the way that we kind of free hold this stuff in place where it can go from one side to the other, making sure these center lines line up. I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to use the tape technique, and this is really handy, especially with smaller pieces that maybe are a little harder to hold in place by whether they form that way or because they're skinny in nature. I'm gonna go ahead and create a little hinge right here. What I want to do is I want to leave this portion over so I can still see my center line, and also I want to make sure the tape that I use is not too tacky. You can easily put this on your shirt and detacky it if it's a little bit stickier than you want. Blue painter's tape is really amazing to use and it does a great job. I'm going to go ahead and line this up and shingle this over the way I typically would, and once I've lined up that center mark, I can go ahead and roll the piece of tape right over that seam. From that point on, you can see it's more like a door hinge, and you can see I can easily manipulate this piece and work right around the edge. This is one technique that you can do that really will kind of give you that extra hand that you need, especially worth working with thinner pieces. Now that I'm happy with the way everything's formed, I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to do about 3/4 of the piece, just like you see here, all the way around from paper to paper. Again, I'm going to let it shingle. Notice I'm not in a hurry for anything. I'm just taking my time. I really like it when the outer piece shingles right over, just like that. I'm going to hold this until it's fully dried, and then we can do the other side. All right, that's one side done. Let's go ahead and open it up. In this case, I can put my glue right down in this seam right here. Oftentimes when I'm doing pieces like this, you're going to notice I'm not in much of a hurry to stick these pieces together. Letting the glue dry just a little bit before pushing it together is going to make it extra tacky and also give you less time that you have to hold it. And there we go. Oftentimes after the glue is cooled for about 30 seconds, I can kind of come through on the back side with my finger and I can smear the glue without burning myself. Just be careful not to do this too soon or you're going to get a blister. There we go. Now we're going to put our attention towards the bottom here. Again, we're just going to give it a quick test fit, make sure we're happy with it. We can open it up and paste the glue right on the edge seam there. And then we're going to fold it into place. Cool. And our last piece. And because we're going to join these two pieces together, I'm going to put a bead of glue right down the middle. If when you do your test fitting, if this piece seems too long, you can always trim it shorter if you need. But typically, it should shingle beautifully, just like you see here. Now that we have our nose done, I'm going to very slowly and carefully peel the very top of my tape off. I do this very carefully because sometimes if the hot glue gets in there, it can hold the tape or cause the paper to peel up. The front nose section is now done and you can see that our fuselage is really starting to take form. Let's go ahead and put our attention next towards our battery box and our front supports. But before we do that, we got to put in our wing hold down peg. You're going to notice that included in your speedboat kit or your short kit if you're scratch building or even the plans that you're going to see a couple different pieces that are going to be calling for wood. This piece here is going to look just like the other piece that goes in the wing. The only difference is they're going to be marking that says W. W stands for wing. So once you see the piece that looks like this with the W, get that far away from your other piece because that piece is going to be slightly looser so it can easily slide together. The two pieces you should be left with look just like what you see here. And if you press it together, they should easily slide in just like that. We're going to glue these two pieces together using some instant CA glue. We do carry all Zap products right on our store. We absolutely love it. Holds really, really well. You can just hold this down. I'm going to put a bead of glue on both sides. Hit it with a little bit of kicker. And just like most things, we always want to make sure they're nice and perpendicular. And I'm going to put a bead of glue on the other side. Now, if you're going to be gluing foam together with instant glue, make sure you use the foam safe version. This glue here, if it hits foam, it's going to melt it. I only use it on wood and plastics and anything else that it calls for. Now that we have our piece glued together, we're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. You're going to notice that there's a little box that's down inside that's left over by our former. All we simply need to do is glue that together. Stefan's making a funny face at us. And we're going to pull that in place. We want to take our time and make sure this easily pushes down in place. Almost there. Just like that. Now it's important when we put in the main wing peg that we have this beveled edge forming up. The reason is because when the wing comes in, it's going to come in at an angle, and we don't want this portion being too tall before it finally rotates up and slides in. So make sure that this area here is pointing up. Now that we've test fitted it and we're happy with it, I'm going to go ahead and hold this vertical. Place a healthy bead of glue right along on both sides of the slot. There we go. And again, with this facing up, I'm going to start on the bottom, or on the top section here. I'm going to rotate that down in and push it into place. You should see that this matches up nice and flat, right up against the foam, and it's not going to go anywhere. Now that we have our wing hold down glued in, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the main battery tray here. What we're going to have is we're going to have our main battery tray, and we have the two side supports. You're going to notice a common theme here that a lot of this stuff is A folds, B folds, or simple foldovers. First thing we're going to do is we're going to weed out our pieces, and we're also going to fold over our two doublers and glue them together. And all we simply need to do for these two pieces is crack them in half and glue them together. Notice that with a lot of these joints here, I'm not worried about getting glue all over it. A little glue goes a long way, especially with these fold over pieces. And for our main battery tray here, this is going to be an A-fold, which means the bottom or top plate is going to be above the side plate. To do a proper A-fold, we're going to leave the side plate firmly against the table. We're going to rotate this up 90 degrees while pushing it against the table. Once we're happy with how it folds together, we're going to come back and we're going to put glue on the bottom of the side plate, starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. It's always a good idea just to make sure everything's nice and square. What makes these edges really nice is that constant pressure up against the table. When we do that, we get a nice clean edge. Again, we're going to test the other side. Side plate is against the table. Bottom plate rotates up. That fits nicely. Rotate this up to 90. Now would be a really good time to cover the top plate here of where the battery Velcro is going to sit with some tape. This is going to make this area a lot more durable, and also as you pull the battery off and on the Velcro, it's not going to peel up the facing paper. Now what I'm going to avoid here is wrapping around the tape too far on the other side, because the doublers are going to basically be there. So don't only let it go maybe about 1 inch over on both sides. If you wrap the bottom here, the doublers are not going to be sticking to the foam, they're going to be sticking to the tape, and they can break loose. There we go. With all of our pieces assembled, we're going to be putting our attention towards the front nose. These doublers are going to glue in with a 90-degree angle pointing upwards, and we're going to line this up just with the edge of the plywood. You're going to notice these doublers basically go right to the edge of our front former. Once we're happy with the fit, all we need to do is put a bead of glue right on the bottom and the back side. We're gonna press this down and right on the edge here. And we're gonna do the same process on the other side. Again, we're putting just on the one side of the plywood, and that's gonna run perpendicular out from our former. And all we need to do is press it into place. This battery tray support's not only going to give the battery tray the support it needs, but it's also going to make the nose incredibly durable. So now that we have our main supports glued in and our battery tray built, we're going to go ahead and install it into the fuselage. You're going to see this knockout on both back sides here. This is actually going to be where the guide wires go up to be able to plug into your battery. We want this pointing towards the tail and then the flat edge pointing towards the nose. You don't want to install this backwards or else your battery leads are going to have nowhere to go. Easiest way to put the battery tray in is I'm just going to go ahead and pass it through the very back and just start it like you see here. From that point, I can take my glue gun and paste a bead of glue on both sides of the support, and then I'm going to push it on through until it's flush with the front edge and then pull it down. Put a nice healthy bead of glue right on both sides. And now I'm going to have the battery tray angling up as I push it on through. And once I get to the very front edge, I can press it down into place. We're going to let this dry. We're ready to move on to our next step. Our next piece that we're going to prepare for our fuselage is going to be the rear portion where the upper rear vertical fin fastens to. It's also where the rear gunner is. To prepare this, we're going to weed this out, and we're also going to cut some single bevel cuts here, 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 and here. Let's go and weed this out first, and then we'll go through the bevel cuts together. Again, anytime I'm weeding pieces out, I always like to just kind of go through, use my knife, and be able to carve it out. There we go. To make this a little bit easier, I'm just going to run a light score line right down the areas that I'm going to bevel cut. You always want to make sure that you use a nice sharp razor blade for these steps so you don't have the foam ball up and not give you a clean edge. The first bevel cut I'm going to do is going to be on this portion here, and it's going to be facing towards the bottom. Every bevel cut that we're going to do is going to be facing towards the bottom on the trailing edge. So all I simply need to do is fold this over. I'm going to hold my knife at roughly a 45-degree angle. If you've built with us before, bevel cuts should be nothing too unfamiliar to you. And we're going to make sure that we have at least a 45-degree angle, just a little bit more. Don't ever worry about having to go back again and again until you get the angle just right. No one's going to see this portion because it's going to be inside. And that looks pretty good. If we don't get the form we want, we can always go back and trim a little bit more. We're going to next fold over this next piece here and put the bevel cut on this side. Mostly what I'm always watching for when I'm doing my bevel cuts is to make sure that I'm not going through the facing paper. If you accidentally do, don't worry, because you can easily fix it with a piece of tape. And we'll do the same process now on the other side. Simply crack this over 180 degrees. We'll flip it around. And again, I don't hold my blade perpendicular. I hold it at a wide open angle so it tracks nice and straight. There we go. Bend looks good. And one more. Gonna sneak our knife in there. Now before I bend this together, I'm gonna go ahead and bend our little tail gunner piece up 90 degrees. This is gonna give us the ability to act as a jig, so make sure that this bends symmetrically and properly. Get a new hot glue stick here. And again, we're just gonna put a little bit of glue on the inside. You're gonna notice on this build compared to many other ones, I'm using the triangle a lot more. This really helps me make sure that every piece is gonna go exactly where I want it. And it makes the build go a lot quicker too. Perfect. You can see I've already bent this piece in, just let the foam crush a little bit. You can open that up. I'm gonna do a quick practice fold, and the way I'm gonna bring this around is I'm gonna bring it right down to the table, and I'm gonna hold this edge firmly against the table using it as my friend, and I'm gonna hold the sides perpendicular to the table. Once we've confirmed that everything from the front to the back is nice and flat and straight, we can make sure we have plenty of glue in our hot glue gun. We're gonna put a bead of glue down each open groove. Again, I'm starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. Oh, and let's go ahead and just put a little bit of glue right here. Now I can fold it around. I'm gonna press it flat up against the table and against that piece. And we're gonna hold this here until it fully dries. There we go. Our last step on this piece is we're gonna close our little trap door for our tail gunner. Just gonna put a bead of glue right around the edges. So take it to the table and fold it down. And I'm just gonna hold this down just a little bit longer, let it fully dry, and then we're ready for our next step. Now, if we just take this to our fuselage and go to mount it, you're gonna notice here that the foam is kind of lifting this up. So what we wanna do is we wanna take our razor blade, and recognizing that this portion here is the flat area, we're just gonna take this angle and follow it along as we stay just above the facing paper on the outside, and we're gonna trim that nice and flat. I'll go ahead and start with this side. Again, I'm gonna take my razor blade nice and flat, and as I get back here, I'm just gonna basically cut this bevel down. Here's one side. And we'll just start on this side here. Again, you wanna make sure your razor blade's nice and solid. There we go. And the easiest way to get this last little piece, we'll just take this up against the table, and we'll cut that flat. Don't feel like you have to get this in just one cut. You can trim it very slowly, take your time. But at the end of the day, what you should see is a nice flat surface between your upper dorsal area and the rear of the fuselage. Now on this piece, you're gonna notice a couple different tick marks. We have one on the very back and on the very front. You're also gonna notice that we have this beautiful center line going along with this. The way we wanna position this to glue this down is we wanna put the little center tick mark right over top of the back seam and have this piece perfectly flush with the back. And on the front, we're gonna take the front tick mark and we're gonna line it up with the crease as well. Now that we're happy with the fit and we've practiced this, we're gonna apply a bead of glue right on the very bottom surface of our rear dorsal area on both sides. And right along the back. Easiest way for me is to start with the back, line it up right in the middle, and as I drop it down, I can move it back and forth and line it up perfectly. I'm gonna put gentle pressure on the whole entire area to make sure that it pushes down against the fuselage and gets a really strong glue joint. You can use a scrap piece of foam or even the edge of your finger, scrape off any extra glue that you may have. Just like that, the rear of the fuselage is really starting to take form with the tail gunner position. Let's go ahead and move on to our next step, which is assembling the rudder. Now for our vertical fins, we're not gonna have to worry about putting a rudder in this or a rudder servo. For that reason, we're gonna be using differential thrust on the front, using the motors to give us our yaw moment. Basically, the motors, as they ramp up in RPM, will give us more thrust. That's gonna move us rather than the rudder. This makes things very, very simple for us, but we do want to have a nice strong rudder, especially with the crazy things we're going to be doing with this airplane. For that reason, we have two sides, we have a doubler, and we have these barbecue skewers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and glue our doubler down, and we're going to make sure that the outside edge lines line up. You're going to notice that this doubler here is going to protrude from the bottom. That's because it's going to tab into the rear dorsal of our fuselage. So let's go ahead and glue that down on one side right now. Again, we're going to line up our edge marks. If you're building off the plans, these should be in blue. There we go. And we're going to let that dry. While that's drying, we're going to bring back our fuselage here, and you're going to notice here that there is a seam right down the middle that we can easily be able to push our barbecue skewers through. This is one reason why we didn't bother putting the glue in that area, so we can easily push this down. What we want to make sure is that as we sight down with our barbecue skewers, if we lined up everything with the hash marks, it should be perfectly vertical, and it is. Now that we've confirmed that we can easily bring both barbecue skewers on both sides and the front and the back down through, we're going to glue these barbecue skewers protruding about 2.5 inches, and we're going to break off the excess. Now we can go ahead and glue them down. And we'll do the same process on the other side. This is really going to help us marry the vertical fin to the fuselage and give us a lot of strength and durability. Now that we have our barbecue skewers glued down, you're going to see the same etching on the other side. We want to line up that etching, which you can easily see on the very bottom here, with our foam former. We also want to make sure that the tip and the leading edge line up perfectly as well. Now we're not going to worry about trying to squeeze all this together all at once. What we really want to make sure that we do is that we line this up in such a way that everything lines up and the vertical tail is still vertical when we stand it on edge. We have plenty of time to be able to do this. All we simply need to do is place some glue right along our edge line. We're going to line it up, again using those little tiny edge marks that we put on the kit. Line up our surface. And I'm in no rush, I'm just looking at the very tip in the front, the very tip in the back. And then what I like to do is just bring this to the edge of the table and make sure that it stands vertical. Once we're happy with the way everything's placed, we're going to let it fully dry for at least 45 seconds, and then we can move on to our next step. Now that we have our two pieces joined together, you're going to see that they're pretty much parallel to each other. What we want to do now is we want to seam this together with a bead of glue on the very outer edge. I'm going to do this in two halves. I'm going to do the back half first, and then I'm going to do the front half second. All we simply need to do is start from the very top. I'm going to sink the tip of my nozzle right down the edge, placing a bead of glue about 1/8 inch from the edge. Now I can take it to the table. I'm not going to worry so much about keeping this part joined together. I'm simply going to fold this in half, making sure that our seam is symmetrical. In other words, we don't want it flat against one side or the other. We want them joining in the middle. And you can see that basically if we did an imaginary center line, this piece tapers in on both sides. Now that that's dry, we can do the very front half. I'm going to get my nozzle up as high as I can. Place my bead of glue right on the inner edge all the way to the tip. There we go. Again, I'm just going to line up my pieces. This is going to have a little bit more pressure right along this edge right here. Again, once I'm happy with that, I can kind of pick it up. I'm just going to confirm as I look down that imaginary center line that everything is lined up pretty, and it is. This is going to make an incredibly strong symmetrical tail for us. Our tail is now done. Let's go ahead and do a quick test fit. Now already we should have taken this down to our center lines, and you can kind of easily just kind of rock this back and forth. Feel where those center lines are. There we go. And with just a little bit of gentle pressure, it's going to set down right into place. Just like that. Now as I sight down this, I can see that it's perfectly perpendicular, and that's exactly how we want it. And again, we have a lot of little tick marks with this. We're going to make sure that the center line of our fin on the leading edge and the trailing edge line up perfectly with the tick marks of our center seam on the front and the back. We always want to test fit this to make sure we're happy with the fit. We're happy with the fact that it's perpendicular. Once we are happy with that, we can gently lift this up. And I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the very bottom of our fin on both sides. There we go. And we're going to go right down here. Find those little original holes there. A little bit of rocking motion. Oop, almost there. There we go. Press it down into place. Then you can use a scrap piece of foam or the edge of your finger. Just wipe off any extra glue. Now I'm not going to take anything for granted. I'm going to hold this perfectly perpendicular until the glue fully dries. All right, now that our rudder is on, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is our elevator. Let's go ahead and put our fuselage to the side. We'll grab our elevator piece, and that looks just like that right here. The elevator is basically one piece, but we are going to have two foldovers here that are going to help basically give us a strong leading edge and also key into the fuselage. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and crack this over 180 degrees, and we're going to do a double bevel cut. Again, you can do your double bevel cuts right off the table. I'm just holding this up so you can see this extra easy. There's one side. And there's the second side. Make sure whenever you do your double bevel cuts that you can easily move this up at least 90 degrees, if not a little bit more. Same process on the other side. And again, we're just confirming that I can go up at least 90 degrees. Now that we have our double bevel cuts done, we're just going to use a rocking motion, and we're going to roll this down until it goes 180 degrees firmly against the surface of the elevator. The reason we use a rocking motion is it allows this area to basically be able to crush down for you, and it also keeps the facing paper from fatiguing in case you accidentally cut through some of the areas. If you do cut through the facing paper, just reinforce the leading edge with some tape and then complete your fold. We're going to make sure that we do this step with the flat against the table so we don't unintentionally put any kind of warp into our elevator. Extra glue stick here. And we're going to roll that down. And we're just going to focus right on the leading edge, make sure it's nice and flush and we have a nice round. We're going to hold this for a good 45 seconds until it's fully dry, and then we're going to do the same process on the other side. Again, we're just going to use a rocking motion as we roll this forward. Make sure the leading edge and everything is nice and flat. And then we're going to come back with our hot glue. I always like to keep my hot glue about 1/4 inch in from the edge. That way it doesn't squeeze out and make a mess. Again, rocking motion. And we're going to hold it until it dries. You're going to kind of notice that the leading edge on both sides here is kind of opened up and flayed where our double bevel cut is. And that's exactly what we want. All we need to do is put a thin bead of glue right in there. And then we can use the table as our friend and kind of roll this around on both sides. And once the glue is cooled, we can kind of seam it together with our fingers and hold it in place. This is a really cool technique that you guys can use in a lot of your other builds too, if you have some kind of unsightly, curves that you want to close up. There's a nice window of opportunity when the glue's been drying for about 30 seconds. And this is mainly with our Flite test glue, that you can kind of work with it where it's not going to burn your fingers, but it's still pliable. Now that we have our elevator formed up here, we're going to go ahead and take the time and we're going to cut out our elevators, and we're also going to cut the bevel cuts for our hinges and reinforce them. First thing we're going to do is we're going to cut through the score cut on both of our verticals for our elevator. Forgot I had the dull tip there. There we go. Now we can crack this over 180 degrees. And just like all of our other control surfaces, we're gonna go just above the facing paper at about a 45-degree angle all the way to the tip. Make sure that you have no resistance whatsoever when you push this down. If you do, go back and trim a little bit more out and get a little bit closer to the facing paper. You can also use some coarse sandpaper to cut your bevel as well. Same process on the other side now. Notice I kind of work the blade in a little bit. Now all I need to do is just simply rotate the knife, do a back cut, just like that. Perfect. Now, this is going to give us a nice strong hinge, but to make this last forever, I'm going to take a little scrap piece of foam, and I'm going to put a thin bead of glue right down between the facing paper and the foam. And I don't want to leave it there like that. I want to scrape off as much as possible. All I'm doing is I'm simply pushing the glue down right into the facing paper and the foam and marrying it together with a little bit of a stronger bond. We're going to give this a couple seconds to dry. I can lick the tip of my finger. I can run it right over that seam, and that's going to take away any tackiness that you may have, so now your glue joint won't stick. Let's do the same process now on the other side. Again, we've checked our motion. Everything looks great. And I'm going to just smear this in, kind of like a paintbrush. Our goal is to get all the glue that we possibly can off of it. And lift the tip of our finger, smear right down, and that will take away any tackiness. And rather having to flip around the B-17 fuselage to deal with the control horns and the linkages, let's go ahead and put those in right now. One thing to keep in mind is that this elevator is a little bit different than most. The KS step is going to be facing up, which is going to give us lift, but in this case, the bevel cut is also going to be facing up as well. Typically, our bevel cuts are facing down, so if you built planes before, don't just assume that this is going to be facing down, because what that will cause is the airplane to pitch up because you're actually generating lift down, and then when you throttle back, it'll drop its nose. You want the KS step facing up. Now, for that reason, our control horns are going to be facing down, which means the surface that we want to be looking at is going to be the surface that's completely smooth. In our kit, we have 2 swappable control horns, and we also have our linkage stoppers here. Our linkage stoppers are included in our electronics power pack that has all 4 motors, the speed control, the servos, all the wiring connections that you need. So if you don't have that, you can get those separately if you're using your own electronics. The hole that we're going to install our linkage stoppers on is going to be the outermost hole that you see right here. I like to support the control horn just simply by putting it against the table. And these holes should be perfectly sized to basically press right through the hole with just a little bit of pressure. Now we can put the linkage stopper backer on it, just a little rubber grommet. And I'm going to very carefully just put my screw in a couple threads. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the other side. The only difference is we're going to have the barrel of the linkage stopper facing the opposite direction. And we're just going to use just a little even pressure, press that right down in. Again, stopper on the back. And just a couple threads of our lock screw. Now when we glue down our control horns, we're going to want to make sure that the barrel of the control horn is exactly over the hinge line. So we take this here, we should be able to press this down into place, and you're going to notice that when you sight down the barrel, it's right over the hinge line. Once you're satisfied with that, all we simply need to do is put a bead of glue and press our control horn in place. I like to just go on the other side and wipe off any extra. We're going to let this dry and take our time, and we're not going to touch this because if this fails in flight, you're going to lose control over that control surface. Same process on the other side. We're just going to fit this down in. We're going to verify that the barrel is directly over the hinge line. That'll give us even throw both ways. Then bead of glue right over the hole. We'll press it into place. And again, we're going to let it dry. Our elevator is now done. Our next step is to install it into the fuselage, but before we do, let's go ahead and install our servos now while it's easily accessible before we put our elevator in. Now it's going to be important that we pre-center our servos before we install these. If you don't have a servo centering tool, we have those available in our store. They're also included in our crafty kit, which is a wonderful tool. Now, we're not going to go through the steps of showing you how to center your servos. Our hope, because this is a little bit more of an advanced build, that you've already done this. But if you haven't and this is your first build, check the description in the link below. We have a really good short video showing exactly how to center your servos and prepare them. Now for our installation of our elevator, we're going to be using our two FT9G servos. One important thing to point out here is that both these servos are centered, but you're going to notice that the arms are pointing in the same direction. This is really important because with our elevator, we want both servos to work together to not act as ailerons. In other words, move them in opposite directions. We want them moving in the same direction. So make sure that your servos are already pre-centered and that you've selected the control arm that looks just like what you see here, and you've also fastened down with your screws. In our electronics kit, you'll also notice that we have plenty of these Y harnesses. This is going to wire together for you, so basically it takes both signals and puts it into one wire lead. Another important thing to mention is don't throw away your extra servo hardware because we're going to be using the long servo screws to fasten down our motors when we're putting the motors on our wings. Now in this case, we want our servo leads to be wired together. The easiest way to do that is to pass one servo lead from one side to the other. I'm simply going to just let that fall through. There we go. Now you can see I have my lead on the other side. I can simply make my connection, take a little piece of tape to fasten it down, and secure it. It's really important whenever you're using a Y connector to make sure that your servo leads are matching up with the ground wire, the power wire, and the signal wire all matching the other side. So here you can see we have our white, or in this case yellow, signal wire, our power wires in the middle, and our ground wires at the end. We're going to do the same process now with this lead. Again, we're going to match up our ground, our power, and our signal. And we always want to tape it down because you don't want to have this accidentally pull loose during assembly, or maybe after you're flying or you have a crash, and then you lose your elevator control. Now we can go ahead and feed this back through. Both of our leads are actually joined together. And we can press this in place. On this side, our servo is going to be pointing downwards, and on the other side, our servo is going to be pointing upwards. So before we glue this in, we just want to confirm that we have our servos positioned in the proper way. You're going to notice on this side where it's closer to the elevator that the servo arm is pointing down. On the other side, you'll notice that the servo arm is pointed up. This is going to give us the controls that we need to be able to have the elevators move up together or down together. Once we're happy with that, all we simply need to do is lift this up just slightly. We'll put a drop of glue on both sides of the wings, and we'll press it down into place. And same process on the other side. We'll just lift this up slightly, put a drop of glue on both sides, and press it down into place. With just a little shake, we can easily reach through, and our lead is going to pop through just like we see here. We're going to let these servos fully dry into place, and afterwards we can cut out the channel that we need to install our elevator. Now to cut out the channels, all we simply need to do is connect the dots in between these two pieces. Now you can either cut this freehand or use a straight edge. All I'm going to simply do is I'm going to very carefully line up with one side to the other, and with a saw motion, cut from one dot to one dot. Get my hands out of there. And don't be alarmed if this piece kind of opens up a little bit. We'll easily be able to adjust that when we put our elevator in. Same process on the other side. Little sawing motion's all we need. And there we go. Now that we have these slots cut out, let's go ahead and do a quick test fit of our elevator. You're going to notice that the KF step of the elevator is going to do a really good job and push it up against the fuselage and form it into place. Just going to go ahead and press that forward all the way to the front nose. A little bit more, and there we go. Now, a really good way to be able to tell if our elevator is perfectly perpendicular to the tail and also horizontal within the fuselage is to sight down the inside. You're going to notice that there's some cutouts that are basically going to be parallel to your tail. You want the tail to be parallel to these holes, and that's going to line up with your wing. Once we're happy and everything is basically perpendicular to the fin and also parallel to the inside of the formers, we can go ahead and put a bead of glue down each side and glue it into place. I'm going to start with the bottom one first, and on the top one here, I'm just going to hold the fuselage in alignment based on how I need it to be able to get everything to meet up properly. So I can see that my little hash marks are basically on the inside right here. I'm going to place a bead of glue right on the side of the elevator. Just hop over there. And I'm going to line up my piece and let it dry. Once this side is dry, I'm going to go ahead and once again check and make sure that it's parallel to the inside of the former. I'm going to do the other side, and then I'll do the same process on the top of the fuselage. Again, between every time that we glue the elevator down, we're going to check to make sure that it's lined up properly. Mainly, we're going to focus on making sure that the fuselage is just inside these two hash marks, and that when we sight down it, it's still parallel to the inside of the former. All right, and then finally, we're going to go ahead and put a bead of glue right on the top of the elevator, all the way down. And again, I'm going to line this up with the other side. All right, our last one here. Now that we have our elevator in, we're ready to move on to our next step, which is going to be our pushrod wires. Now in your kit, you're going to see a bunch of these pushrod wires. All we simply need to do is we're going to hook on our one end that has the pre-bend Z-bend, and we're going to cut the other end about 1/4 inch past the barrel. We'll do our first side, and then we're going to rebend a Z-bend in here, and we'll reuse that wire and do the other side. And as I mentioned before, we're going to use a center hole on our servo arm. More throw does not mean more control. And all I simply need to do is basically just hold this neutral. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch past, and then I'm going to cut that off with a pair of wire cutters. I need to get a new pair of wire cutters. I can guide this up through, and there's one side done. I can simply pinch the trailing edge together with the elevator, and then I can screw this tight. Now, when we power this on for our final steps and say this elevator moves a little bit, don't worry. All we simply need to do is loosen the screw, readjust the elevator, and tighten it down again. One important thing to do whenever you're using your linkage stoppers is make sure the screw is nice and tight. You don't want this coming loose in flight. Our next step here is we're going to go ahead and use these Z-bend pliers that are now available in our store to basically make a super simple Z-bend. A lot of people have a lot of difficulty with Z-bends. I do walk you through how to make them with the pliers, but oftentimes if these are too loose or at the wrong angle, it's going to be sloppy and you're not going to get the control throws that you want. Z-bend pliers basically take all that guesswork out for you and make it super quick and simple. Same process as before. We're going to use the center hole of the servo arm. Little rotation's all we need to pop through that. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch beyond the barrel, and I'm going to cut it with my pliers. We give you plenty of extra push rod material, so if for some reason you're not happy with something, especially with your push rods, don't ever hesitate to rebend it. And we're just going to pass this through, and then we're going to lock it down. Now, before our maidens and pre-flights, we're going to go through all of our controls, make sure that they're centered up the way that we want, and especially we're going to make sure that those screws are locking down our push rods. This is a pre-flight item that you always want to do before you fly your airplane. Our elevators are installed, our push rods are installed. Let's go ahead and finish off the tail by installing our tail cone for the tail gunner. So now it's time to put the rear tail cone on here, and the pieces that you're going to be looking for are going to be these two pieces that you see here. We're going to have the rear tail cone wrap, and we're also going to have the rear tail cone cover. First thing we want to do to prepare the wrap here is we're going to go ahead and peel one piece of the paper off of one side. Again, we always pull that paper vertically, make it release nice and easy from our new maker foam. And then this piece we can leave alone. Now, because our rear tail cone is going to be wrapping around basically what is a little bit of a curved edge rectangle or square, depending on how you look at it, we're going to go ahead and kind of use our thumb and fingers to mimic that shape the best we can. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to go ahead and roll it around as we put it on the piece. But it really makes life easy if we either go to the edge of the table or we use our thumb and fingers to be able to curl that around. What we always want to do is we just want to be able to mimic the shape as much as possible and get as close as possible before we glue it on. Now that we have our piece curled, we're going to cut a real slight bevel here just so this tail cone meets nice and flush with the rear of our fuselage. This step should really be nothing different than what we've already done on the nose of the airplane, and by now hopefully you're pretty comfortable with it. There we go. And I'm going to kind of try to favor this towards the camera for you, but it's easiest actually if you have this pointing towards you and you're facing directly on for it. You're going to notice a hash mark right at the very top here, and that hash mark is going to line up beautifully with the very tip of our tail cone. And just like I did before, I like to try to wrap not just the top, but the top and going down the side. It really helps it make it rigid. And also, if I want to, I can use a piece of painter's tape, not necessarily on the top because this is blocking it, but I can use it on the side to kind of lock it in. I'm going to go ahead and put that there just so I have an extra helping hand if I need it. So, I'm just going to go ahead and make some final adjustments here. I'm going to line it up here, make sure that I can hold it here, and then wrap it around to the very edge and make sure everything's nice and flush. From that point, I'm going to go from the bottom of the straight on the side piece all the way through to where it curves on the other side. So basically I'm covering roughly maybe a little over 1/3 with foam. And we don't have to rush this part. Again, I kind of like to let the glue tack up a little bit. Now I can go ahead and press this in place. I kind of like to let the foam paper shingle a little bit for me, and that kind of helps hold everything in place for me. There we go. All my attention is going on to exactly where I want the paper that has the glue on it. I'm not really worried about anything else. I'm just looking at the center tick mark and down the sides that I have the glue on. You can see giving that glue kind of a 15 to 20 second rest here really helps it tack up quickly. Again, I'm using my Flite test glue, and the setting on my glue gun is just below half, so I'm not running the glue very hot at all. Okay, now that we have the one side done, I can kind of roll this on its side here. I can use the pressure to push up and just get this piece exactly where I want it. Just like that. And again, we're not going to really worry about this bottom piece. We can take care of that as we come down closer to it. But once I'm happy with the way it fits, I'm going to focus the majority of my glue on the back of the fuselage. And again, I'm just going to kind of come down right to where it starts curving. We'll let that glue rest for a second. I'm just going to roll that right underneath here. We're always going to give this about 30 to 40 seconds between each glue joint that we do to make sure it's fully dry before we move on to the next step. And finally, you can see that we're kind of coming up on the very end here. I'm just going to give a little bit more curl to this foam so I can push this right on the edge and push that in. Give that a second to cool down a little bit. This piece is going to be under a little bit more pressure because we're making a pretty unique angle here. So I'm going to hold this a little bit longer than what it needs to make sure it grips. If for any reason you get impatient or it pops off, just apply a little bit more glue. That's going to soften up the glue you have, and then hold it longer than the first time around to make sure it fully cools. And after about 2 minutes of holding, it looks great. This final piece here, we're going to go ahead and form with our fingers because what we want to do is we want it to kind of slot and tab in. It's going to push out on our first piece and then notch in beautifully, just like that. It's going to put a lot of pressure on this piece, so make sure that you have a good amount of glue and that you don't rush this and release it too early. Again, I'm just going to let that glue rest just a little bit. This is where that piece of tape can kind of come in handy if you want it as well too. And we're going to roll it back. Don't worry about any extra glue squeezing out. We can always smooth that out with our fingers or a scrap piece of foam. There we go. And we're just going to hold this for about 2 minutes, let it fully dry, and then we can put our little cover on. And now that we have our tail cone on, we're just going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. And you're going to see that this pretty much fits perfectly, but we need to do a bevel around the entire edge to be able to let it seat down properly. So I'm going to go ahead and carefully just cut about a 45-degree bevel. If you remember earlier, we had 2 barbecue skewers that we were using for basically the spars in the center of the tail. We're going to use the scrap from those barbecue skewers, and after we're done painting it, we can simply go back and we can paint those barbecue skewers black, and we can use those as a tail gun for this airplane. So if you don't have that, just grab any barbecue skewers that you have around and you're good to go. You can see that this piece fits beautifully right inside. Once we're happy with the fit, all I need to do is simply place a bead of glue right around the edge. There we go. Gonna let that rest for just a split second. Gonna find my little center hash mark. And we're gonna press this up in place. Now I can kind of pinch this piece up a little bit on the bottom, get this to line up. And then carefully press it in. Again, we have plenty of time to kind of position it exactly the way we want. There we go. Gonna hold this for about another minute, let it fully dry, and our tail cone is done. We're ready to move on to our next step, which is gonna be the top canopy. Now for our top canopy, we have a rear canopy portion and we have a front canopy portion that's going to be removable. Make sure before we start this process that you have all the pieces that you see right here. The first piece that we're going to start with is going to be the rear piece. So this should be pretty familiar to you by now here. We're just going to basically remove the cavities of the foam that is roughly the width of the foam. And we're also going to remove some facing paper to allow us to curve this. The facing paper that we're going to remove is going to be these two thin stripes on the front and the rear of the canopy. It never hurts to just kind of go down and very delicately push through the facing paper. Don't go too deep. You don't want to make a crease line. You just want to remove the paper nice and clean. There we go. And we'll just pull this paper up. And while we're conditioning these pieces, let's go ahead and do some bevel cuts here, just so we're ready whenever it's needed. The bevel cuts that we're going to want to do are going to be around the pieces that we see in the very front here. The easiest way to do this bevel cut is to fold it 180 degrees, take your razor blade, and just about a 30 to 40 degree angle is all you need. Nothing too major. And a lot of times when I have a hard angle to get to, I can even come down to the table like this and just simply drag it along. And all I'm doing is just keeping my blade just off the edge of the table. We can always cut these a little bit deeper if we want when we're doing our test fitting, but this just gives us a really good head start. Feel free to pause the video, make sure that you have your front canopy section, your rear canopy section, a popsicle stick, and the 4 3D printed latch parts that you see here. The first section that we're going to put our attention to is going to be this rear section. Now before I fold this together, I'm going to go ahead and carefully crease this up on all 4 sides. And all I'm doing is just using the table as my friend to curl this up and give at least a 45-degree bevel. We really don't want these pieces to fight against us as we're trying to hold them together. There we go. We're going to leave the side plate firmly against the ground, and we're going to rotate the bottom or the top plate, in this case it's the top plate, up 90 degrees for an A-fold. Once we have that, we can simply roll this around, and you're going to see, as I rotate this, how nicely this piece curves right around it. Now, a couple of things that you want to keep in mind here. We're going to have a little bit of excess, and that's okay, because we're going to come back with a razor blade and we're going to trim this so we get a nice tight fit with the top of our fuselage. This step's going to be a little bit different for us because typically we would do our A-fold, we'd hold this over, but what we're going to do in this case is we're going to do this whole section at one time. And for that reason, and because it's going to go like this, I'm going to focus my glue right along this edge, and then I'm going to fold it up. I'm going to keep my glue back probably about 1 millimeter from the edge because I don't want to accidentally glue it against the table. If I put it on the piece I was going to go against the table, the glue would most likely squeeze out and it would adhere to the table, and I'd have to clean up a little bit of a mess. Typically we want to do this towards us, but I'll go ahead and do it towards the camera for you. We're going to rotate this up, and as I bring this in, I'm going to kind of let that glue squeeze a bead, and I'm going to use the table as my friend to make sure that I have everything nice and flush. Now I'm not pushing down too hard. I'm letting everything just naturally kind of flow into place, and where I'm putting most of my attention is making sure that the radiuses on the top corner rest nicely against our former, and that our overlap is pretty much even on the bottom. Again, after about 20 or so seconds, our glue is cool enough to be able to easily handle. And we're going to hold this for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes to let it fully dry. Now you're going to see when I lift this up, This is nice and flush on the very back edge, and it looks beautiful. We don't have any glue globs that we have to cut off. Now, if you do have some glue globs, don't worry, just simply remove those, so that way when the other canopy piece comes against it, it's not gonna be lifted off. Also, if you have any kind of glue globs inside this little hole right here, go ahead and poke them out before it gets too hard. Now that we have this front section done, this is gonna help us key into the rear section. And this rear section is simply just gonna go ahead and kind of fold in, and we're gonna shingle the front section over it so it naturally holds on its own. Once we're happy with that, we can pop it loose, open it up 180 degrees. I'm gonna place a nice bead of glue right in that undercut, all the way down, and again, all the way down. We're gonna let our glue rest for a couple seconds, tack up a little bit, and then we're gonna repeat that motion that we just did, and then we're gonna hold it in place for about a minute to a minute and a half. There's that side. There's that side. Not too worried about the part that squeezes out because I can simply just take my finger, wipe it off. Same thing with these two areas. And I'm gonna hold this in place for, again, about a minute to a minute and a half and let it fully dry. You can see after about a minute, everything's held in place. And if we just put this on our rear fuselage, you're gonna see that it doesn't actually fit fully down. This is gonna be because we need to trim some of these areas. Now, the easiest way to kind of sight on how we're gonna need to trim this is we're gonna take a nice sharp razor blade, and you're gonna see that this radius here would end right at the foam. And on the back, we're gonna transition this to be basically flat. So all we need to do on one side is use a little saw motion. We're gonna start our bevel cut right up against the outside facing paper. And it doesn't have to be rocket science here, but as this tapers up to where it's gonna go to the top of the fuselage, we're simply just gonna roll this flat. You can take your time and trim this as much as you want, but once you do this motion here, it's really easy to repeat. Again, I'm gonna start from flat, I'm gonna start curling in, just kind of imagine how this is gonna sit, and then ultimately, I'm gonna end up here. Now when we take this down to the actual fuselage, you're gonna see a nice flush fit, you're gonna see our tick marks line up, and virtually no gap on the sides. Feel free to trim this as much as you need to get this kind of fit. I promise you, it's easier than it looks. Now that we're happy with our fit and our bevel, we can go ahead and glue the rear portion on. The glue that we're gonna apply is gonna be on this bottom section here and on the insides of each side once we know that we're definitely happy with it. Keep in mind that you have a center tick mark on the front and on the back, and we're gonna use those to line up with our tick marks here. The important thing is when we line up our tick marks, we're not gonna go to the edge as you see right here in the front. We're actually gonna go and line up the rear trailing of our canopy with the seam that you see here, making sure that our little center tick mark lines up directly over top. You're gonna have a nice little gap here, and this is gonna be if, say, maybe in the future that you wanna put any kind of FPV equipment or anything like that, this area can breathe. One thing we did on this plane is not only to lighten it up, but to give you access to everything you need so you can really make it your own, you can customize it, you can make custom turrets. Really, the world's your oyster with this one. All we simply need to do is we're gonna place our bead of glue, and you're gonna notice I'm not taking it right to the edge, I'm actually keeping it in a little bit. Don't need to worry about that back piece. And then right here on the bottom. Again, I'm gonna let that rest for about 10-15 seconds. And the easiest way for me is I'm gonna just take my time, I'm gonna line up this back edge just the way I want it. Gonna come right down to the front edge. And a little squeezy pressure on both sides is gonna make those edges marry perfectly against the fuselage. It's perfect. Our canopy's now on. Let's go ahead and put our attention towards the front section. Now, same process as before here. We're gonna go ahead and kind of pre-curl our edges. Again, I'm using the table as my friend, keeping that top plate firmly against the table. Just like that. And I always like to do a test fit where I bring it up and I hold it in place. Once we're happy with that and everything looks good and we're not really fighting the piece, we're gonna do the same process as before. I'm gonna make sure I leave this intersection here. I don't wanna pull too much glue out of that, so I'm gonna go ahead and start my glue beads on both sides Again, about 1 millimeter from the edge. Take a good sweet time. We're going to rotate this up here. I'll put this so you can see it easily on the camera. We're going to hold this in place for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes, and then we'll fold down the front of our canopy. Now that our back section is glued in and everything's looking good, we're going to go ahead and just do a test fit one at a time for our front flaps. Now what we should see is as we push this down, we can easily line this up where we have a nice even fit all the way from the very tip to the very center. Once we're happy with that, we're just going to go one at a time. I'm going to place my glue kind of focusing really actually on the bottom here. Nice healthy bead. We're going to let that rest for about 10-15 seconds. And then we're going to repeat that motion that we just did. Not worried if any glue squeezes out, I can easily wipe that off in just a second. And we're going to hold this for about 1 minute till it's fully dried, and then we're going to do the same process on the other side. Okay, there's one side down. You're going to probably notice that there's a little bit of pressure on the center section here, and that's okay. Just make sure that this one side's down nice and tight. Then all you have to simply do is open that up, and you're going to see that everything really locks into place beautifully. I'm going to hold off putting glue right down the center at the moment here, and you'll see why in just a second. Again, I'm going to focus the glue right around this edge and then glue it down. And again, we're going to hold this for about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes and let it dry. All right. We still haven't glued the center section, and that's because we're going to be using this popsicle stick to kind of sit down in here and be able to fit in here, and we're going to glue the center section and this popsicle stick pretty much at the same time. The first thing I want to do is, again, we're going to note that this is sitting above it, roughly the thickness of a piece of foam. We're again going to go back and we're going to trim this so it sits down nice and flat against the former and also flush against the sides. And same principle as before. We're going to kind of use these existing gaps to kind of imagine where this is. So we know that we have a nice little radius right here, tapering back. And again, you can take as many swipes as you need. I'm just going to have the edge of my razor just completing that line. I'm going to slowly curve up as I come through. Now this very front section here, you can see is nice and flat. So we're just going to go ahead and use our razor blade. Gentle saw motion. Basically, these are darn near 45-degree bevels going to 90-degree angles. And let's see how it fits. We have tons and tons of hours of just practicing this to make sure that we give you the best possibility to have an amazing fit the very first time. And I'm happy to say it looks really good. If you see any gaps that you don't like because any kind of foam is under there, just note where it is, cut out a little bit of the foam, and wait until you can finally get a nice smooth seam all the way around the edges and it's flush on the back. Now that we have our front canopy section, we're going to prepare the front latch here. We're going to take our popsicle and just kind of focus in mainly on the back here in a really light, gentle, rocking motion. We're going to go in at about a 45-degree angle. And if you look through the nose here, you're going to see that it kind of pops through that former. That former is actually going to help us with giving us the strength that we need to keep this from lifting up. So we kind of want to just pop this through. Oftentimes you're kind of pushing some glue out of the way, and that's exactly what we want. This also at a 45-degree angle should match up very nicely with exactly what we need for our top cowling. May go back a little bit, may go front a little bit, and that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue this popsicle stick right down the center line. But the first thing I want to do is I want to put a nice healthy bead of glue right down the middle. I'm not gonna push the popsicle stick in too far. I'm gonna let that glue rest. I'm simply gonna just take this nice and vertical and set it into place. Take your time, don't let this piece get weak by wiggling it around. Just let it sit, rest, and dry fully. And again, once we're happy with how everything's dried, I'm gonna put a nice healthy bead of glue to really reinforce that front notch. We're gonna give this a good 2 minutes to dry. We can do our test fit and we can trim it to size. While our piece is drying here, we can put our attention towards our 3D printed latch. This 3D printed latch is a really cool way to be able to fasten our pieces down, and it works on a lot more than just this B-17. It's on our Otter and a lot of the other airplanes that we have as well. All we need to do to assemble our 3D printed latch is take our 3D printed spring, kind of pull it back a little bit with your finger, and we're gonna line the stop plate up and the center plate up together. This is gonna give us the ability to move this back and forth. This top cover is gonna get glued on with either instant glue or hot glue. The biggest thing we wanna make sure though is that we don't get any of it inside of our mechanism or it's not gonna work properly. I'm simply gonna line this up, make sure I have full throw, and now I can turn this on the opposite side and I can put either a bead of hot glue down or an instant CA, and I'm gonna put a very thin bead right on both sides. I'm keeping this facing upside down so it doesn't naturally creep in and get to where we don't want it. And I'm also putting a very small amount of glue down on both sides. And just for my own peace of mind, while it's drying, I like to move it back and forth just to make sure nothing's creeping in and gluing it down. If you don't have any instant glue, we have all of our instant glues from Zap available on our store. You can get it right to you. You can get it anytime you need. And we might as well just do a quick test fit here. We're gonna rock this into place. And that works beautifully. It's important when we put this in that we don't push it too far forward and have this protruding out. We want the very edge of this to be nice and flush. Once we're happy with the fit, all we simply need to do is put a thin bead of glue, and I like to keep it far away from my center latch. We're gonna rock this into place. We're gonna rotate it in again. Little wiggles all we need. And again, it's nice and flush from the very back. And nothing's sticking. Now's the time to go ahead and test fit our piece. Everything is nice and solid with our everything is nice and solid with our popsicle stick. You're gonna see that we're gonna slide this down into place. And that holds beautifully. Now all we simply need to do is rotate it up and pull it out. This is gonna keep you from having your latch come loose, and anytime you wanna remove it, all we simply need to do is move the latch up and then slide it out just like that. If you notice that your piece is kind of moving forward more than you want to, easy way to fix that is just put a little drop of glue right at the very front there. And that's gonna act as a stopper to not let that piece go forward. Just make sure you don't push too much in there or else you're gonna have to remake that hole. Now at this point, our fuselage is now done. We are gonna hold off on putting the front greenhouse on till the very end because you probably are gonna wanna paint this, and it's a lot easier to paint this whole assembly without having that greenhouse in the front to mask off. Friends, I wanna thank you for taking the time to build along with me on the FT Tubby B-17. Now, our next video is gonna take you through all the process of building our wings, our bomb bay, and ultimately putting this plane together. Make sure you look for our wing build video in the description below, and we'll see you next time.